Please sit. Does anybody need water, bathroom break, smelling salts? It's Trinity Sunday. And the Trinity Sunday sermon, who among us doesn't look forward to that annual explication of the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, prefaced, of course, by an exposition of the obligation to try to explain the unexplainable and the troubles involved therein, by a gruff and stuffy, gray and dandruffy older white clergyman. We want a Trinity Sunday sermon to make us feel like the harried cat tirelessly pursued by Pepe Le Pew. Le sigh, le pant, le heave. Well, today's three readings were compiled to bolster the doctrine of the Trinity, but each has its own theological import, and this week I was drawn to Isaiah's account of his calling and how it might inspire and teach each of us. I attended Yale's Institute of Sacred Music on the campus of Yale Divinity School for my studies toward work in church music. I spent a lot of time on the Divinity School campus, and I worshiped regularly in its chapel, where I observed, shall we say, a certain fervor among the Div students. If you've never witnessed a chapel full of future clergy people sing, "Here I am, Lord, is it I, Lord?" then perhaps you've never experienced that kind of spiritual energy. You might say that some of us less enthusiastic students had a common feeling of nausea. Actually, the calling experiences of some of my classmates remind me of Arthur's story of how he became king of the Britons. And my reaction to them was akin to Dennis's reaction to Arthur's. Arthur says, "The lady of the lake, her arm clad in the purest shimmering samite, held aloft Excalibur from the bosom of the water, signifying by divine providence that I, Arthur, was to carry Excalibur. That is why I am your king." And Dennis responds, "Listen, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony. You can't expect to wield supreme executive power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you. I mean, if I went round saying I was an emperor just because some moistened bint had lobbied a scimitar at me, they'd put me away." Well, for most of us, it would be presumptuous to compare our calling experience with Isaiah's, but far be it from me, an eye-rolling skeptic even in my 20s, to question the heat of the coal pressed to your lips, or the turbulence of the flapping of seraphim's wings in your presence. We are all callable, not just to ordination, and right now, we are all preparing for a calling. This congregation, as we discern the next phase of our ministry, and our high school and college graduates as they prepare for the next big step in their lives. As we engage in self-examination, we might all learn something from Isaiah's moment with God, and from Herbert and his father, too. Actually, Monty Python and the Holy Grail is full of calling stories. Herbert's father found his calling building castles in a swamp and wanted his son to maintain the family's holdings. But Herbert was called down a different path. Herbert's father comes in and declares, "One day, lad, all this will be yours." And Herbert replies, "What, the curtains?" "No, not the curtains, lad. All that you can see stretched out over the hills and valleys of this land. That'll be your kingdom, lad." "But mother..." I'm father. But father, I don't want any of that." "Listen, lad, I built this kingdom up from nothing. When I started here, all there was swamp. Other kings said I was daft to build a castle on a swamp, but I built it all the same, just to show 'em. It sank into the swamp, so I built a second one. That sank into the swamp. So I built a third one. That burned down, fell over, and then sank into the swamp. But the fourth one stayed up. And that's what you're going to get, lad, the strongest castle in these islands. But I don't want any of that. I'd rather... Rather what? I'd rather just sing. My own calling was nothing like Isaiah's or Herbert's, or dare say like those of some YDS students. I went to university determined not to pursue music as a profession and would study for a career in environmental policy. But still, I chose the University of Rochester largely on the availability of good music instruction, especially organ lessons, and I ended up earning more credit hours in music than I did toward my geology major. 1991 was the first year in my life in which Easter fell on my birthday. I was studying in Siena, Italy that spring, and I spent the Easter holiday traveling, arriving in Cambridge, England on Holy Saturday. On Easter morning, I told my B&B host that it was my birthday. She wished me many happy returns of the day. My first hearing of that expression outside of a Winnie the Pooh story. I attended choral Eucharist in King's College Chapel that Easter. The choir sang Mozart's Missa Brevis in F, Kerschel number 192, with a string ensemble, and during part of that Mass, overwashed by beautiful music, perfectly performed in an incomparably exquisite setting, I was moved to tears, only a few, just a few, and thought, I could do this. After graduation, I went to work at Walt Disney World, and within weeks, became aware that I had no musical outlet for the first time in my life, and I was missing singing and playing keyboards. So I reached out to a leading musician in the diocese for advice on how to find a church music job. It would satisfy my craving to make music and provide some extra spending money. I landed a part-time job at an Episcopal church north of Orlando, where I found a congregation of conservative evangelicals split between a folk service with music led by a band and a traditional service with choir and a mediocre electronic organ, which I was to lead. The musical tastes of the two groups didn't actually diverge all that much. It was mostly the ratios of praise choruses to traditional hymns that differed. Exposure can lead to self-differentiation. And it was in that community where I began forming my own theological and liturgical views. During my short tenure there, I came to love the work of making music in the liturgy, but knew that this wasn't the environment I was to thrive in, and that I would need to develop my skills to succeed. And to that end, I decided to pursue graduate studies in organ performance. That's my calling experience. No hot coals, no clouds of smoke, no divine voices. As such, it is emblematic of the kind of calling George Kilpatrick describes in interpreting Isaiah. The call is really a sense of vocation brought to a focus in a decision. That need not be either sudden or dramatic. It may be, and generally is, the culmination of a growing awareness of what one may and ought to do with life. To everyone, God has given certain gifts and capacities, and the secret of the good life is the use of these to the highest ends. Frederick Buechner builds on this when he says in his well-used quote, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." There's more to learn from Isaiah's moment before the Lord of hosts, so let's look a little closer. In his own telling, Isaiah's calling is a three-step transformation. Awed by the immensity of the divine presence, he immediately sees his own unworthiness and sinfulness, exclaiming, "Woe is me, I am doomed, for my own eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. I, a man of unclean lips, I who dwell among a people of unclean lips." His confession is step one in his transformation. According to Kilpatrick, God can do something with those who see what they are and know their need of cleansing. Immediately after hearing Isaiah's confession, God sends a seraph winging toward him with a hot stone to purify his lips, saying, "This has touched your lips. Now your iniquity is removed, and your sin is wiped out." Step 2 of Isaiah's transformation is his experience of forgiveness. A forgiven person can confront others' sinfulness more authentically than one who has not wrestled with and been forgiven for one's own sins. Just last week, a visiting friend told me about an experience in the rural fundamentalist church she grew up in. One Sunday, a man in the church was so offended by the lively, friendly chatter of congregants in the minutes before their worship began that he stood up and berated his neighbors, accusing them of unseemly behavior before the Lord. He expected silence and solemnity in preparation for worship. And since only men were permitted to speak in church, my friend, then a teenage girl, would not have been permitted to contradict him. But later, others challenged him privately, saying that their conviviality was a sign of the joy they felt in community and before God. How many times have we also taken umbrage at the levity of our fellow worshipers or at the style of parts of our worship? And have our complaints been born of humility or of judgment? In doing so, do we represent the will of God? Or is it our own likes and prejudices that drive us to indict others who are themselves and whose views may be different from ourselves? I love the way Kilpatrick describes Isaiah's prophecy. There is no gospel, that is, good news. There is no gospel in denunciation. Thunder and lightning do not cause growth. Only the life-giving touch of sun and rain can do that. Only the assurance of divine mercy can bring hope to sinful people. One who would speak for God must know forgiveness not as a doctrine, but as an experience. Finally, Isaiah responds to God's query. When God asks, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And Isaiah dedicates himself and his redeemed life to the ministry God calls him to with the words, "Here am I, send me." Not everyone who experiences forgiveness or redemption hears the call that often follows. And some who hear do not answer, or they answer no. Isaiah, for us, is an example of a faithful response to both God's redemption and God's calling. Whatever our experience of calling, whether we've felt it already or are seeking our path, whether it was or will be hot and sudden or cool and incremental, God may call each of us. What is your gift or skill or passion? And how might you apply it to your life's labor? That is your calling. Whether raising your voice in song or applying power tools to raw lumber or anything in between, your offering can strengthen God's community of blessing on earth. And God may call more than once. Many are blessed with multiple skills and talents, and I am sure that God does not begrudge setting aside one task to use a different ability. So here we are, testing our vocations. Through our work of self-reflection and transformation, we of St. Luke's, both individually and communally, are called to confront our sins, test our skills and talents, seek forgiveness, and listen for our vocation. Whether we are 18 or 80, whether we are one person or 100, whether for the first time or the 5th, we are seeking our path into the future toward the destination God calls us to, where we can employ our best selves to unify and lift up God's family of all creatures here on earth, both as individuals and as a community called together in this place. Here am I, send me.